Hello, my name is Kelly and I'm with Techipedia, your go-to tech source for professional IT insight and inspiration. Just a reminder, today's presentation is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording shortly after the presentation. Don't forget that this webinar is for you, the audience. Get your questions into the Zoom Q&A console as we go, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Today, we are proud to present 7 key AI adoption challenges and how to overcome them, presented by AltaML. With that, I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves.
Thanks, everybody, and welcome. My name is Rick Makos. I'm the Managing Director of Eastern North America and Services Director for AltaML. Been in the analytics and the data infrastructure for analytics for over 30 years, and really looking forward to providing these insights for you and your teams. I'll pass it to my cohort, Jill.
Thanks, Rick. My name is Jil Macdonald, and similar to Rick, I have a number of hats, our managing director, as well as our regional director of services for North America West. I've had the opportunity through most of my career to work on building AI and digital tools, and also from the side of leading teams in-house to be able to build those, but then also working with a number of organizations. So I'm really eager today to share a little bit about what we've experienced and hopefully help you in your journey as we go through around how you can combat these adoption challenges. Maybe a little bit we'll step into on who is AltaML. So our purpose is really here to elevate human potential with applied AI. When we talk about human potential, it's really about augmenting that human effort with AI so people can focus on bigger issues and make decisions better in the workplace. And what we really mean around applied AI is actually about taking those AI opportunities and making sure they're actually deployed and in use. So very, very much around the center point of adoption and why we're here today. That's been the raison d'etre for AltaML, is really making sure that we're applying those tools, we're using them in day-to-day business, and we're actually seeing that value. AltaML itself is a leader in applied artificial intelligence in Canada. We have offices spanning the country and one of the largest teams focusing on building AI products for companies and with our partners. We've had the opportunity to work on over 300 unique AI products and use cases for over 75 companies. A little bit as it relates to the takeaway for today. When it comes to the results that organizations anticipate from the implementation of AI, it won't come as much of a surprise to know that the biggest motivations for adoption were lowering cost, increasing sales, and/or improving workplace productivity. But what we do know is that across the market, AI adoption is quite low and sits around 20% of use cases actually adopted and deployed and subsequently used. At AltaML, we've had the opportunity to see a larger trend in AI adoption for tools we build with customers, and it's been due to our focused efforts on being live to the challenges we'll discuss today. We know artificial intelligence can be extremely powerful. However, the value is not realized if they're not deployed and adopted and used. We've taken some of each of our experiences we have and collated them together with the top AI challenges we've seen. What I would like you to take away today is the understanding of the elements that are needed to support and enable AI. And we're hopeful that the awareness of these challenges will give you stronger understanding of all the facets that are needed to surround successful AI work and create a more sustainable and in fact impactful digital program for you.
Thanks, Jill. As Jill mentioned, we've actually worked on over 300 plus AI engagements, and our teams have documented really 7 core themes that have been in the way of really having an AI first approach to your business. These range from cultural and organizational issues, as well as the systemic or technical challenges of implementing and adopting AI within your organization. So the format we're going to use today is we're going to describe each one of these challenges, some of the key activities you can do to undertake ways to get ahead of these challenges before they become barriers to success, and you can get into that 80% of people who are not deploying and adopting AI with sufficient success. And then it'll be followed by, which we think is the most interesting, real customer examples where they would address these challenges with business practices and approaches to actually solving them organizationally. And we think that's the best way to actually get this across. So let's proceed. The first thing we see a lot is fear, right? Probably the most common thing we hear from all the people we deal with is, oh, AI is going to basically replace me. I'm going to lose my job. They also express concerns that these AI tools and machine learning tools are going to have access to all my personal identifiable information. So PII data, very concerned that that will not be handled correctly. They're also, what we find is they actually focus on the negative side of things. People don't understand there's always the negative side of AI rather than the actual outstanding benefits that could actually be occurred within your organization out there. Also, media represents AI as robots. They're going to be evil. They're going to be taking your jobs. So what we typically do when we engage our customers is we educate them on what are the potential use cases in their industry, in their organization, across the whole enterprise. We actually make sure that not only our team really understands the privacy rules of the industry that we're playing in, but also have had all the various security certifications and privacy certifications on our team so we can recognize when privacy concerns arise and we can address them. We also really want people to focus on the business cases and the positive return on investment that can happen. So really, my take on it is get a small win, start working with a business case first. That should be your first step of what you actually should do, right? Actually build that business case and show people the positive impact to your organization that can come from deploying AI and machine learning. And then to address the privacy concerns, make sure you've got good privacy practices. You understand not only the privacy regulation frameworks that exist in your country, in your state or province, or specifically in your industry, because they could be very different from industry to industry. So we believe these are all very, very important things in optimizing, the internal decisions you make with AI. What we typically find is you'll see as we go through this results in better outcomes for the stakeholders you serve, increased revenue and profits, which typically results in more jobs. And you'll hear more about that at the end of the presentation. We have a quote from a very, very senior executive in a large organization. But for what I'll do now is let's pass it to Jill, and she'll give you a real life example of how fear was overcome in an organization when it came to AI.
Thanks, Rick. Fear is one of the most common things that we hear that companies believe, and I'm going to use that word believe is really important, is holding them back to AI adoption. We can say that, yes, this is absolutely at top of mind, but it actually typically goes in conjunction with several other adoption challenges that we'll go through today. The example I chose to share was a little bit about a model we use to predict the likelihood of customers churning to better inform their relationship to the prediction of customer item purchases. This allowed the company's sales and customer service team to target customers and items who were likely to churn in advance to better manage and retain customers. The challenge we had here was our client, as it related to adoption, was that the model was built with input from their senior management team and key leaders, something that we will absolutely discuss later today on the importance of having that senior leadership buy-in. But what our client did not want to do was actually engage with end users during the project. They didn't want to engage because there was a level of fear, or a fear that they thought was actually present, and a fear of change on, well, how is it going to impact their role, or they may not want to use a tool. And that really substantially caused challenges because they had an assumption that fear was present, and the assumption would lead to some adoption challenges. The model itself had great performance outcomes. There was also great outcomes as it related to being piloted. But at the end of the pilot, we did a customer discovery session with our client as they were looking at possible opportunities to commercialize the product. And what we realized is that there was actually a disconnect between the need on this customer churn item with their sales teams and sales reps, and disconnect between senior leadership and those end users. And the lack of involvement of the end users in the process, due to the fact that leadership had felt that there was fear present, really undermined and resulted in a strong misalignment, and therefore the right tool and product had to go back, be recalibrated, re-experimented on, and rebuilt in a way. And just the acknowledgement on the fact that the fear conversation wasn't had early and wasn't targeted to understand, is fear actually present? And by not tackling this head on, there was that misalignment, and you developed a product that wasn't aligned towards the needs of that team. And it wasn't aligned towards the needs of the market. And so The whole point of noting this was just around there's likely an assumption that there is fear. That could be a very real assumption, or that could just be assumption in of itself. But what we found is that we'd always advise to have conversations around fear and understand impacts of individual roles and start having discussions early on. This has allowed for stronger alignment across teams and individuals, and also ensures that you're getting the best outcome and best value realized. And I'll explain to you in our next example a little bit about how you can do this. But most importantly is try to make sure that you're thinking about fear, you're talking about fear, and you're understanding where that perspective of fear is coming from. That enables you to lean in and understand how you're going to address it moving forward.
Thanks, Jill. The second theme we see a lot is integration. And this really goes to the applied side of the applied lab that we have. Is a lot of people don't look at this as a solution that integrates into their business. They look at it as a standalone product. So the users basically don't adopt it because it's set up as another thing they need to just log into. We also find that a lot of the IT departments, because there's such a competition for AI and ML talent, machine learning talent, is at an all-time high. Typically, the organizations have to go outside to get talent. So there's this little bit of a play between the internal IT organization and an outsider firm like ourselves to really get the full view of how to integrate these things into their business. And then many organizations just think it's a standalone solution and don't put enough thought into how to integrate it into the current workflow. So what we do is we basically make sure that people understand all the potential of the use case across all their departments. And from the get-go, we look at how this can be integrated in your business. Is this going to be integrated in a workflow? Is this going to be integrated as maybe a score that goes into a database? Or does this need to be like a full-blown application that needs a user interface that integrates into the workflow of the business? So you have to think about that up front and make sure that you actually understand that end-to-end connection before you actually start building anything. That's actually built into many of the methodologies that are out there. We also make sure that we actually use industry standard agnostic open source tools that actually allow us to have maximum flexibility when we're actually integrating these into solutions. You build something that's proprietary in one organization, very hard to actually deploy that and integrate it across other solutions that may exist in other departments across your team. Really important to forge relationships on the technical side and the business side, really starting to build those bridges to make sure that the technical teams can speak the language of the business and they understand all the integration points. It's surprising how many companies have IT departments that don't understand the business processes that exist within their organizations. So make sure you have this, the people have the training, include integration in your ML, machine learning 101 training and videos and written communication, so people start to think up front of how they actually start this integration. Over to you, Jill.
I'm not sure if I can express the importance of early understanding the user journey. And user in this case is the individual or group or system that will be using the prediction or outcome of the AI tool, as Rick mentioned. Typically, we map the user journey, the business process, as we flesh out the use case or the problem that we're looking or opportunity we're looking to use AI against. And it's very important in embedding this early in the process to better understand the impacts and enable successful integration. Per my former comments about fear, using this intelligence can actually enable you to have that targeted data to inform those decisions and impacts and inform those conversations about fear, because you actually understand what could be the impact and what is the business process used today. Diving a little bit more into the integration, in the example here, we made a no-touch claims model to prioritize which claims insurance agents should handle for reviews and which ones should be automated. When building our model during our experiment, we determined a claim to be valid if the claimed amount was the same amount as the final amount. At the time, our client had provided details on already captured documents, including process flows, tools, and a lot of the things we would look for as it relates to integration. What we found was that these documents turned out to be quite outdated. And as a result, there was some misalignment in terms of the end user's actual process, as well as criteria they used to make existing claims decisions. This caused an impact in the model, and further experimentation was needed, causing delays as well as a delay in time frame. The team went back to jointly perform the experimentation and re-rolled this out to teams. But the rework could have really been countered by digging into that business problem, that end user journey, the workflow right from the start, using approaches like feasibility assessments to validate understanding of the business context and the hypothesis for solving business problems. And frequent touch points with the client as a way to explain the analysis and outcome is really important. Knowing that business process as well as the tools that enable you to do that process will allow you to have a stronger pathway forward. So you knowing the solutions that you may need to integrate, the tools and technology you need to be linking into, and the actual process steps that you might be impacting, that really gives you a stronger line of sight as you build those tools, you understand the user journey more, and you're better prepared for the integration and deployment of the tools moving forward. Rick, I'm going to pass it to you.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Jill. Oops. Excuse me. The next one we see is maintenance. Is basically AI is a journey, and many of the outputs are probabilistic. We go through a journey and we train models, and the actual outputs may not be as accurate as people would like, as it's compared to the business. So it's a journey you go through. And these exceptions really have to be designed and planned for. Typically, there's a feedback loop that actually is required for the model to improve. There's basically a virtuous cycle of, the model being trained, it being shown data, it learning, actually then executing in an applied way, creating more data that actually then makes the model actually get better and better and better. So that needs to be in place for good AI practices. As a result, people need to start talking about maintenance way early in the process, early in not only the sales part of the process, but the project delivery cycle as well. You need to set up the ecosystem that you have to actually make sure that you can adapt and have the data-driven approaches to get these models to learn and improve over time, and that they're captured and refined and built to actually learn from this data and grow. In many cases, people will actually start to build multiple models. This happens in credit lending and fraud areas, where multiple models are run. As new data comes in, one model may actually get better and better at actually predictions, and one may drift to be not so accurate. So they actually have a bit of a competition to the fittest, and then a new model will come in. So I think the key point is here, think about maintenance very early in the process, build up the machine learning and AI operation to actually feed these models data, learn from them, provide the proper maintenance, and have them grow and maintain in the future. If your organization can't put those in, look for a company that could help you to actually build those machine learning operations for you for your organization. Pass it to Jill for a real example.
We typically focus heavily on building the tools, getting them into production, which is another word for the integration step we just touched on, and then actually starting to use them. But as Rick alluded to, model maintenance is a critical step that's necessary when working and using any AI product or tool. This is a step that should be planned for, considered imperative, and understood to be part of the workflow. And I can't exemplify that enough in terms of really making sure you're aware that maintenance is a critically important step in the process. We worked with a large energy and natural resource company on a predictive maintenance use case. This is a very typical type of use case we see across a number of sectors. In this instance, the company had not fully defined the roles and responsibilities as well as flags they needed for their internal business unit teams as well as IT to notify when drift could be occurring in the models. Without this step, the team continued to use the model, but they started to notice some of the predictions were not within the range originally identified. The frontline team started to lose trust in the AI model itself, and it resulted in reverting back to former processes and many workarounds. The team stepped back and realized that there was likely drift occurring in the model. With this, they set out to work jointly with their IT team to understand who even had ML capabilities to first retrain or possibly recalibrate the model. But secondly, they also noticed that they needed to establish some sort of dashboard to display triggers that would identify when the model might be drifting and clearly outline who was responsible in the frontline business unit teams, as well as the IT teams, to either identify and watch for these flags, but also who should they be actioning to actually perform the work. Building this maintenance plan alongside your integration and deployment efforts will allow for a far smoother transition. As well, you're not undermining your own self by potentially causing yourself issues down the road. Given that model maintenance is such a non-negotiable aspect when it comes to working with AI products, it's really essential that you start to ensure and how you consider planning, roles or responsibilities, and making sure you understand how you're going to resource this activity as you start to use your AI products and tools. Rick?
Thanks, Jill. One of the more important aspects is leadership and having potentially misaligned leadership goals. Executive has some very specific ways they get defined and metrics that get defined for them, customer success, revenue, profit. Since AI is a journey, it's an incremental journey, and the connection to these results typically may not be well understood. A lot of executives know they need something. The shiny new toy is AI, but they're not clear on how to get there. So just like having a good business strategy is important, it's equally important to have both a data strategy and also an analytics strategy to support these business goals. And it's really important to make sure they're all connected. It's also really important to make sure that you have executive sponsorship on any of these projects. And that could be on both sides, the business side and the IT side as well. It's really important to understand the ROI of the solution, build into early in your journey what the ROI of anything you're building if you're starting small. So you talk to your teams about the process early, about what ROI looks like, and identify these key KPIs and implementing a successful strategy and get them tied to the executive success, right? We believe there's significant value in synchronizing the business, the data and analytics strategy, building this data-driven ecosystem that maximize reuse and maximize learning needs to get good positive outcomes in your AI journey for your organization.
As Rick alluded to, the elements of data and analytics strategies are critically important for organizations to gain more traction and move forward. At times, that overarching strategy isn't necessarily present for every organization, but there almost is always a line of sight to specific business unit leaders' goals, needs as it relates to improvements, revenue growth, or digital innovation efforts that you should be thinking about how your AI products align to if you don't have a broader corporate strategy. Leadership alignment is one of the areas we see very, very clearly tied to increased adoption, but also the success of how AI products or tools actually make their way through the entire life cycle. Our example here is a large public sector company. They had some great AI use cases, models, and products built, but the ideas were gathered from their mid-level management teams and stewarded from this level. When the team was putting together the engagement and presentation for an executive leadership team on the AI program, it was clear that there was some misalignment to the use cases in terms of their strategic value intent. Yes, they were valuable, but they weren't necessarily aligned to the actual business unit executive's strategic goals and outcomes. And they didn't lead to the right challenges. And by that, the lack of adoption was inherently seen because you weren't seeing that leadership alignment from the top. Other examples where we've seen AI adoption challenges really come from the efficiency to be able to progress through use cases and building those AI tools. Alignment from senior leadership, without the alignment, of senior leadership, there can likely be challenges with gaining access to time from frontline individuals or specific data sets. There are three required things as it relates to building AI tools: data, domain expertise, and data scientists. What we've found is that without the leadership alignment, we typically see challenges in accessing those data domain expertise. Those are those subject matter experts who really understand that problem or the opportunity you're looking at. And without being able to work with the senior leadership on gaining access for their time or priorities for their time, we're really finding that the tools being built or not being built in the same way are successfully able to be adopted in the right way by end users. And typically, a way to combat that is really to start to work with your senior leadership on how are we identifying and prioritizing use cases? How do they have visibility into the selected use cases moving forward? How are you using them to be able to lead from the front, be able to support you as it relates to selecting those resources, aligning in terms of needs, and making sure that it's understood in terms of the value that can be provided? In addition, we found that individuals and leaders that lead from the front are able to tackle fear conversations head on. They're able to show and exemplify the value that we are needed and how you want to live and breathe inside of AI. Without it, we found typically AI products aren't meeting the end user's needs. They're either not creating the same level of value and they're not getting the same speed and traction that you would typically find in other use cases. Rick and I are actually going to switch it up a little bit, and I'm going to introduce the next challenges, and Rick's going to go through the actual use case opportunities. So explainability is another challenge because what we can find is that AI models can be seen as what's called a black box. And what it can be also challenged is that without being able to explain what the model is, what assumptions you use, the data that actually went into this, you're risking the level of adoption by the end user because they don't understand and may not trust the models. This is something we encounter quite frequently across our entire AI lifecycle. It's critically important to explain in clear business, non-jargon terms, all the facets that make up your model, especially as you work to integrate with regulatory agencies, board members, or stakeholders. The documentation and awareness needs to be clearly understood by everyone so they understand the pathway to get to that prediction. And they also know that it's founded in the right data, the right assumptions, and the right coding that gets there. It also helps you understand where things can go wrong. And if they did go wrong, how would you mitigate this? And how would you explain this further? This clear understanding will build trust and enhance awareness, as well as bring an understanding to the impacts and use of the tool itself. We've found that without these details, first-hand users will struggle to support and adopt these tools if they don't understand. If a conclusion provided by the system overlaps with what the user already knows and they think is correct, they're not going to question it. But what happens if they disagree? They will want to know how the decision was made and how you got there. That will make sure that they build that trust in the model, and they're actually using it and adopting it. This is absolutely some ways to achieve it. And if you want to look at mitigating that, it's really ensuring that inside your process, you capture how you're going to explain it, how you could run parallel workflows to pilot it and use within your user groups to better explain how they're using it and be able to document that. And it's also something that you want to make sure you're tackling head on with your development team, your user group, as well as your business leaders to make sure it's able to be understood and clearly articulated in a way that anyone can understand and doesn't have to be a technical individual to be able to learn it. Rick, I'm going to pass to you for an example.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. This is a model for model explainability to the exactly what Jill was talking about in the regulators with a financial services organization. Large firm, a US bank, happened to be a large US bank. They had a number of machine learning algorithms really calculating a line of credit for the entire customer base. When they actually were trying to explain how the model was working, there was just too much technical jargon for the regulators to understand. They wanted to check not only what data was being used, what transformations were going on in those data, how the math worked, how did the actual linear algebra at a very, very detailed level was working for this particular model and how it was getting the outcomes. It was very difficult for them to do that. So they actually asked us to create basically a button that basically was an explain button. You would hit the button and it would actually, in a Word document, basically put all the various inner workings of the model in something that could actually start to be explained and demonstrated with real English, business terms, graphs, dashboards, that kind of stuff. So basically a brief was prepared that then they actually could use to get most of the way there for explaining it for regulatory purposes. And then they could actually start to enhance that with their own knowledge. So they had really a business conversation what was going on. Lots of open source tools can be integrated in to do these days. This particular customer actually not only asked us to do this as a standard product feature, but actually integrated into other things they were doing within the organization and in the industry. So not only did their organization benefit, their customers benefit because the model could be checked for bias and fairness. The regulators give it the stamp of approval, and they actually were able to operate their business in a much more much more cost-effective manner. So this was an interesting solution to a difficult problem that they not only deployed for them, but the IP got deployed within the industry and helped the entire industry as well.
Thanks, Rick. As we move on to our sixth adoption challenge, it's really centered on security and privacy. We know that security and privacy is a common conversation and one that should be on all of our radars and is not simply unique to AI, but I'll dive into some of the thought process as you go to how it can actually impact your adoption. So as AI becomes more pervasive in our computing applications, so too does the need for high-grade security in all levels of your system. Security needs to be integral to your entire AI process. Your protection of AI systems, the data, the communications between data, and is critical for users' safety and privacy, as well as it will protect your business's investments. Security needs to be incorporated starting from the product concept and through to the entire life cycle. As new AI applications and use cases emerge, devices that run these applications need to be capable of adapting to that evolving threat landscape. To address the high-grade protection requirements, security also needs to be multifaceted and baked in from the edge devices to your computing frameworks to your cloud environment and the applications that run all of those. At the outset, system designers added security to their AI products must consider a few security enablers that are foundational and belong in a vast majority of their products. Including AI, you need to make sure that you're protecting all phases of your operation, thinking about when things might be offline, thinking what will be happening when you power things up, runtime, how are devices being communicated with each other, and how are your devices communicating with the cloud. Each one of these systems is integral to understanding the protection measures as it relates to your AI program and have opportunities where threats could be integrated in terms of malicious data input into environments that could impact the adoption and use of AI tools. And so it's very much in this use case or an example, sorry, it's very much about how your ecosystem is built to support your environment. Do you have SOC 2 certifications and processes and individuals that are supporting your security efforts? How secure is your environment? Can there be something that might impact your AI adoption that you really need to be thinking through? If there are questions around security, this will absolutely lead towards lack of adoption for individuals in your business. They may not feel confident in building and using the models or feel that the risk is too high or is perceived to be too high and that it isn't a secure enough framework to use. Some models you do use external public data or open source data as well. And so you need to be thinking about what security protocols do you have to address that data? How do you inform and mitigate yourself in terms of understanding if malicious code could be injected into public data? So really stepping back and thinking about this as a system approach and understanding where all the data that you'd be using for AI models is gathered, how secure is that environment, how secure is the communication systems between it, really, really important to understand, because at any point, if there's a possible threat, it will absolutely undermine any use of AI tools because the risk is too high.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I think Jill highlights that, security and privacy and having these things in place is just good business. In this particular case, we're dealing with a customer that we were actually providing a service for them where we were basically looking for building a predictive model for credit defaults. So when we first got the first set of data, we built a system with them, we got it up and running. The first set of actually real customer data came over unanonymized. So what's interesting is we had a group of people that caught this immediately and said, look, we can't work with this data. Our team basically said this is breaking a bunch of privacy rules and also just it's not something that we should actually have in the company. So we called the customer, basically deleted the data, basically explained that the demographic data needed to be removed and anonymized. Turned out the customer wasn't prepared to do that and didn't have the proper services to actually get that done. So we connected them with people that could and actually worked with them to solve this problem. But obviously this could have been a very, very big breach. We caught it early, worked with the customer to make sure that an audit was done to make sure that we didn't have any of that data and this wouldn't happen again. So it's really important that you got people on your team that could know, because data scientists love data. Sometimes they don't care. They just start working on things, right? Because it's been sent from a customer, they think it's okay. Lucky enough, we had knowledgeable people that knew the rules of the industry, knew the rules that existed from privacy standpoint in the country that we were serving. And then we basically were able to adapt and do this. So it's important for your AI team and your machine learning team to advocate for complete privacy, even though they may not be the privacy experts. So it's good to have experience and people that understand this on your teams so you can adapt, work with the people that you serve to make sure that you're not going to break any of these rules and you got all the proper security and privacy guidelines in place so you can help everybody be better, including your customers.
As we move into our last AI adoption challenge, really want to underpin the importance of thinking about responsible AI. This is a critical element we all need to take ownership of, whether it's you building the model, whether you're providing executive sign off for the work, or you're seeding ideas of opportunity for AI. We all have a role to play in thinking about how we're identifying, explaining, augmenting, and reducing bias, and really thinking about doing this in a responsible way. It isn't for others to identify for us, it's for us to make sure that we're taking ownership and understanding how we can build tools responsibly, how we can understand where bias may be occurring, and how we can ethically look at building AI tools for the future. What we typically see is that individuals focus around responsible AI when it comes to demographical data. But what I want to suggest is that you can likely have bias in your model based on how you capture it, and likely a hidden bias. For example, if you looked at energy and natural resources and you say you were looking at how you had an asset maintenance opportunity, if you step back, typically you may not think about bias being related in that model. But in actuality, if you were only capturing data from a subset of your assets only because they were similar or like assets, but the model in fact needed a variety of different types of assets to start to understand the unique similarities or differences, you actually would have a hidden bias in your data based on the data you're capturing and how you're looking at a sample set. The reason I wanted to share this is that responsible AI and understanding variables and identifying, explaining, and augmenting the way you work is critically important, and something that no matter what use case you're looking at, you need to absolutely make sure is understood. There are a number of agencies that, such as the that RAI Global, or that has a responsible AI design assistant that can really help you in understanding where and how you can mitigate bias. For AltaML, we're absolutely underpinned by RAI in everything that we do. We think it's critically important, and we're live to this in every single use case we look at. We will only be working on use cases, I mentioned in the start, that augment human decision-making. And we really believe looking at responsible AI is a foundational way to do that. And so what I'd really encourage you is that if you haven't started looking at responsible AI, that not having that framework and understanding of how bias could be mitigated, you're likely to have some number of adoption challenges down the road as individuals or end users or business stakeholders start to question, did you have bias? Did you look at that? Were you understanding where bias could occur? And so understanding the best way that you can tackle this and looking and working with the Responsible AI Institute and others to understand frameworks is probably your best way to start in thinking about how you can tackle this.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So as an example of where some of this bias was happening, it happens to be a lending offer at another financial institution. In this case, we were helping this customer work through collaboratively on how they could actually improve the segmentation of another lending offers. They were moving from really, I would say, a small set of segments to almost a mass customization approach, where they're trying to target the whole customer base, a much broader base of customers with very, very targeted offers. And then the team that was actually going through the data, so both the people at this particular financial institution and our team, started to notice that as we were collecting the data that was being prepped before to teach the model, that there was really a whole bunch of bias built into the data collection and data transformation, and major demographic segments were just being excluded from the core lending offering. And this wasn't anything that was deliberate. It was just through steps of a bunch of different organizations and handoffs from various groups of people that were running in the operational systems to IT to business. All this was happening through really a chain of events that were connected but not so connected, and no one had a holistic view of exactly how these targets were actually being done. So what happened was the team that was consisted of the customer and ourselves ended up being a lot more diverse look at that people. We had a completely different makeup. So we had a bit of a sensitivity to actually what was going on. So that's one of the best piece of advice is, as you actually start to look at this, look at the whole process, what was working before to actually get data out of systems and get it prepared for these analytical applications may not work as we go forward. There may be some inherent bias built into something as simple as data preparation, and actually use a team of people that actually comes from diverse backgrounds. So we actually start to really focus on that and build that into your integration of your processes. So bias and fairness is at the forefront of all the things that you do. We think it's very, very good business. It's critically important. It's interesting when we actually started to go and communicate this to higher and up in the organization, the discussions got a lot more uncomfortable because we were, a vendor explaining these things to them, and they thought they were doing everything fine. So leadership is supportive of that until there's a problem, and then they, we basically had to work them through all this process to make sure that they don't look. It wasn't anything that was deliberate. It was just a series of unconnected steps that we're now going to fix and build on to go forward. So even though that was uncomfortable, everybody ended up in a much better spot. This company is much focused on being responsible for this, as many banks are in leading this responsible AI initiative for fairness in lending. So we think it's good business, but make sure you look at the whole system and everything that's feeding these models, from the data, how people use it, and even how the math is working inside. So there we go. We've made it to the end. We've talked about all the 7 adoption challenges. As we mentioned, we're talking about cultural, change management, organizational issues, systemic issues, technical issues like security and privacy. We really do hope that we've got some valuable information in your hands. We've given you some ideas of what our customers have done to actually address these issues. We think it is super important, as Jill mentioned. Less than 20% or around 20% of AI implementations really get adopted and actually get deployed in your business. We think it's a big focus of our company to make sure that what we build actually does get applied within your day-to-day business, gets applied, generating value. I think if you look at some of the setup for this particular webinar, there's trillions of dollars of potential impact and benefit, positive benefit that AI can do for your business and for the economy. I think we're trying to get by 2100 the North American bloc to get somewhere around 120 to 150 billion of economic value out of that block. We're not going to get there just by human effort itself. It's going to be a combination of us working together, people working together with these new applications and these new deployments to actually grab a bit of that success in a positive way for you and your customers. Jill, any final comments?
Nothing that you haven't already said. I think just a re-emphasis on the fact that building AI products is one thing, but really acknowledging all the pieces that have to surround that. And it really does take a village of individuals, does take being open and honest and having your eyes wide open in terms of how you're going to move forward, and just being live to the fact that it's unlikely to be able to be accomplished by a singular business unit or a singular IT team, and that there's a lot of individuals that have to come to play to make sure it's successful.
Thanks, Jill. I wanted to end on one quote, and then we'll take some questions. This is Linda Hassenfratz, CEO of Linamar Corporation, large automotive manufacturer in multiple countries. And I'll just read some of this because I think it shows you the positive aspects of all the things. If you do this right, all these 7 adoption issues can actually be eliminated. So AI means increased market share and a larger workforce and higher wages at Linamar. Widespread use of AI has contributed to Linamar's double-digit revenue and profit growth, supported a trend to a larger workforce, higher wages due to the company's increased competitiveness. This is what can happen. This is how we get to the $32 trillion of potential value that AI can contribute to the global world. And we thought this was a great quote and kind of summarized all the positive benefits that can happen for both people and the companies we serve, as well as the communities they serve as well. So stay tuned. We're going to be sharing this presentation following the webinar. Stay tuned for our ebook. We do have a guide to AI adoption that will be out in the coming weeks. We'll make sure that you all get tagged for that and actually have potential to actually take this and apply it to your business as well. So at that point in time, both Jill and I want to thank you, appreciate your time and consideration, and we'll go into some questions from there.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us, Rick and Jill. A quick reminder to get your questions in, as we will now be starting the Q&A section. We can start off here with some of the questions that came in during the presentation. So our first question here, what is the most common barrier of the 7 that you run into on a regular basis?
Yeah, you want to
Apologies,
start?
I was on mute. I thought, happy to take that one off first,
Go ahead.
Kelly. Fear is one of the very common, however, we rarely see each of the barriers occurring in isolation. For example, fear and integration, as we talked about, are very closely connected, and they do create a combined challenge around change management. The real threats to adoption typically take the form of the combination of the barriers we described here, and really acknowledging that the barriers listed in the seminar are connected and ambiguous within an organization is really the critical step to tackling them as a whole, not thinking that it's simply only one item, but looking at them all together and making sure you're almost doing that scan of each and understanding where you are is probably the most important. So I'd say the most common likely fear in terms of what we hear about, but typically it's not necessarily fear, it's actually a combination of many we've talked about.
Right. Our second question here asks how far out AI and ML are from being adopted by small and medium businesses and what these businesses can do to be prepared.
That's interesting. I mean, you know, we have a number of businesses that range in size, you know, from medium size to large enterprises. So I think we're starting to see, you know, medium-sized businesses in that 100 million to 200 million mark actually start to look at, you know, how AI can help them. In fact, in many cases, the really astute ones know that that's a chance for them to jump the curve, right? I can take a different path to success if I actually adopt some of these challenges. What I do find is not only they're trying to build these capabilities, but they'll actually partner a lot more to actually get them done. There are open source companies you could work with. There could be consulting companies like us that actually could build the capability and do some of this for you. So you'll find out that now that there's a lot more cost-effective ways that you could actually do this rather than just building it yourself. So it's not just for the big, it's for the big and small now. So we're starting to see pretty good take up in the small to medium-sized enterprise as well. So how they need to prepare for it? Really start with the business case. Start with how you actually get there. What are the key things you want to focus on? Is it a supply chain problem? Is it a customer segmentation problem? Is it, you know, what do you want to optimize? Really have a good thought on exactly how I want to start. What's that small win I want to start with?
Mm-hmm. Great. This next question here is timely, referring to the fact that the pandemic has changed a lot of the processes that could potentially impact data. So do you encounter data drift specifically as a result of the pandemic? Specifically, this person works on research for early detection of chronic homelessness in Calgary, but they use pre-pandemic data. So they're suspecting that the future data could have a bit of a drift. How would you?
I would absolutely say that likely the future data does have drift. Data drift itself is, of course, a common problem and needs to be tackled as part of that ongoing maintenance that we talked about. The biggest thing to introduce into a maintenance plan is what we'll call a retraining schedule. Machine learning is only as effective as the data that it was actually trained on. So it's important to monitor and detect the drift that's happening. And drift, what we really mean is when the underlying trends of incoming data have actually changed. So in this case, relearn new patterns on newly collected data in pandemic versus pre-pandemic and post-pandemic predictions. They likely all are very vastly different and identify different challenging trends. So you want to make sure that you're adapting your maintenance plan to tackle this head on for vital success.
Our next question asks here, if AI and ML expertise is a limitation, what are the strategies to improve AI capability in organizations and individuals?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think it's kind of what we mentioned before, work with companies and partner with companies that have expert knowledge in this, that can engage your staff, transfer the knowledge, and convey best practices. I mean, we have a whole series of education that we make a big part of what we do on a regular basis. And sometimes those customers actually start things on their own and we don't get the services engagement, but that's okay. We think it's important to actually build up the knowledge just in general. Ask for your executives to, sponsor individual education for yourself. There's many programs. We've sent some of our teams to an MIT program that actually gave them the start on their knowledge. It was a very good program as well. Also engage your leadership. Change happens at the very level. Make sure that they know that you're interested in doing this. Explain the impacts on the organization, engage them to perhaps even go along on some of this education with you so they can get there as well. So that sponsorship is, again, it's a team sport and it requires education, but really important that everybody across the organization gets up to speed on it.
Okay, we go back to the topic here, the hot topic here of responsible AI. In regards to responsible AI, I am in the supply chain industry. So do I need to worry about responsible AI practices?
I could say, regardless of you being in supply chain industry or any sector, it is critically important to just understand the facets as it relates to responsible AI, how you as a user, how you as a part of the business community need to be thinking about it. But kind of going into the question around supply chain intimately. So overall, we know our AI risks may be lower in some industries or lower in some use cases. There will still be sources of bias, as I mentioned, in underlying data or in fairness considerations that should always be considered and looked at. And it may be difficult to know that without conducting analysis on our AI or on the actual variables that you're using and how your data is being collected, you may not actually understand if there is bias in your underlying data sets or in your data itself. And there's also some additional benefits from the increased transparency and the explainability analysis that you can get if you did RAI to really help with some of those other adoption challenges and also show that your organization and you yourself are thinking about how you're doing this ethically or responsibly, and really thinking about that you're coming eyes wide open. I think not only, of course, each use case is going to be very dependent on based on what it's trying to look at predicting and the data that's being used, but RAI is critically important in any use case in any sector, and that analysis will help you on your explainability and so many other facets.
Great. Our next question here asks, what is the best path to a successful AI project? What do I need to focus on first?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I kind of mentioned this at the very, in some of the talk, is I think we got to revert back to just starting with that pencil. What's the ROI? Pick a use case that you think is going to be impactful. And sometimes you actually start with a whole bunch of ideas. It could be 10, 15, 20 ideas. And as you build the return on investment, the potential benefits that come out of that, that'll narrow down which one you should focus on. So inevitably, every good business and IT initiative, whether it's AR, that always starts with a pencil, always starts with what's going to be the positive impacts to my business. So I think that's always the best start. Make sure whatever you're doing is going to be a quick win. Maybe you start small so you can demonstrate benefits to your leadership very quickly, but make sure there's real tangible ROI for that before you even start.
Great, thank you. The next question here, what does applied AI mean from AltaML's perspective?
AltaML's perspective, applied AI means that we're creating, designing, and developing AI products and solutions that are integrated and used in clients' business operations. Our teams do remain current on leading trends in AI and ML, but our focus is not on research or academia. These are areas that are critical for the advancement of AI globally. And we do know in Canada, there's also some really strong hubs as it relates to AI research. And we've got really strong partnerships in those areas. But for us, it's really focusing on applying AI solutions and products that we believe will better enable the use of AI to help our clients solve problems in an applied business context.
Great. This next question, I think something that crosses people's minds. I believe my role can be disrupted or replaced by AI. What can I do to protect myself?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Yeah, it's back to that fear question, right? I mean, if the best way to confront fear is to face it, right? So if you think it's going to be you're going to be disrupted, go figure out what actually is being done in your organization that you think is going to affect your job. If you think there's an AI initiative going on, go and try to understand it. Communicate with your leadership. Communicate with your immediate direct reports. And understand the potential impact, right? I'm going to say it's not 100% of the time. In many of the cases, pretty close to 100%, the person's job gets better. The stuff that they didn't like doing gets automated, gets put into some kind of machine learning program, and then they actually end up doing things that are a lot more connected to the business, a lot more connected to building their career. The other thing we do, if you are concerned about it, ask for some training, right? See if you can be sent on some training, and you can perhaps reinvent your job in the AI world as well, or in the analytics world in general. But best thing to do is take it on, understand what's going on, understand the benefits that could happen for the organization and also for you as well. And take the initiative and learn about these potential technologies and see how they can actually potentially help your career as well.
Great, thank you very much for that. It looks like our last question has come through here, unless we have anything else added in the next little bit here. This question asks about, I've heard anecdotal instances in the time series analysis where simple smoothing or regression methods have ended up providing more accurate forecasts in their ML modeling counterparts. Has this ever happened with a client where a simple model has performed better than an AI model?
I'd say definitely. We 100% tackle problems based on their value and don't blindly apply advanced AI techniques, even when they aren't relevant. The invention of this screwdriver didn't make hammers useless. And so it's really thinking about how is the right way to tackle that. There's always typically a number of ways. And what we do is we analyze use cases up front for their feasibility. And if simpler techniques provide value, for us, there's no point not to recommend those. We really want to be able to provide that understanding to our clients in terms of what is the right pathway, what are some other options of pathways, and what are the outcomes we anticipate to expect. And how do we make sure the data that they have, the understanding of their business process, the bias considerations are understood in terms of really understanding that and really thinking about what is AI. Like the philosophical discuss is disruptive, and we really don't want to make sure that we're getting blinded by technique hype and focusing on interesting problems. We really want to take it back to what is their problem and challenge, what is the right technique to be able to solve that. And even if say basic statistics, there's still some requirement in terms of organizational governance that you need to have as well. And so all this to say is that we really want to step back on what's the right way to solve it and not just look at the buzz or the hype in terms of new techniques, but make sure it's the one that's going to be the right technique for the right problem.
Great, thanks very much for that. It looks like we have one last question here to finish off the webinar today. And that asks, AI maintenance will be a key of future IT departments. How does AltaML support this message?
Yeah, first off, very, very important topic. AI maintenance will always require domain experts, so experts from the business, your business, and AI experts collaborating, and in conjunction with the IT department. So we will typically work with the organization to make sure all those things are aligned. Begin to put in AI machine learning operations, these test and learn capabilities, this survival of the fittest. If the organization can't be built out within the organization, we can actually start by outsourcing that with our own capabilities, or it doesn't have to be us. There's other companies that do this. And then you could actually, start with that outsource approach, have them build those capabilities up, and then migrate to having your team fully do it as they get trained and up to speed. So that's typically the approach we take. Help customers kind of build it if they can. If they do need outside care and feeding and guidance, we can actually provide a service on an outsourced basis. And then typically we'd like to actually build this capability within and move on to the next customer. Don't want to consistently be doing this, but we'll do it long-term if people want us to. We'd like to enable their organization so they can actually be real applied AI experts just like us.
Great, thanks so much, Rick. With that last question coming through, that brings our webinar today to a close. If we didn't get to your question, I encourage you to reach out directly to our presenters today, whose contact information will be sent out shortly with a link to the recording. Additionally, there'll be a survey at the end of this event. We would love to hear your thoughts on how today went. A big thank you to you, the audience, for making time to view this presentation. And until next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.